In the continuation of our examination of Paul's directives in 1 Timothy, verses 13 and 14 provide the theological and historical rationale for the apostle's instruction in verse 12. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. These verses are not isolated nor merely cultural admonitions. They are anchored in the creation narrative and the fall of humanity as recorded in Genesis, reflecting deep theological truths with implications for church order and conduct. The assertion that Adam was formed first, then Eve, refers to the order of creation. This is significant because it speaks to the divine pattern established by God at the very beginning. It was God's sovereign decision to create Adam first and then Eve as a helper suitable for him. Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 22. The creation order has theological implications that extend beyond the mere physical act of creation. It establishes a pattern for relational dynamics within the family and the faith community. The order of creation is presented not as a mere historical note, but as a foundational principle for understanding roles within both the natural and spiritual realms. Paul's reference to this order is crucial because it underscores that the roles assigned to men and women are not arbitrary. They are woven into the very fabric of human identity and purpose as designed by God. The role distinctions are not a result of cultural norms of the first century, but are rooted in the intrinsic design and purpose established by God from the beginning. Furthermore, verse 14 highlights the fall. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. This statement addresses the events of the fall, where Eve was deceived by the serpent and took the forbidden fruit, and Adam subsequently followed her in disobedience to God's command. Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. The text emphasizes that Eve was deceived and that her deception led directly to transgression. This point is not to vilify Eve or to suggest that women are inherently more susceptible to deception, but rather to highlight the consequences of abandoning the God-given order. When Eve stepped outside the established protective order by taking a leading role contrary to the one assigned to her, it led to disastrous consequences. The inclusion of this account serves a dual purpose. It reinforces the importance of adhering to God's established order, and it serves as a historical cautionary tale about the risks of deviating from that order. In Paul's directive to Timothy, it underscores why maintaining this order is crucial within the Christian assembly. Just as disorder led to chaos in the garden, so too can it undermine the health and testimony of the church. Some argue that these verses are simply reflective of cultural biases present in the first century. However, such a reading misunderstands the depth of scriptural unity and the consistent theological framework presented throughout the Bible. The New Testament frequently refers back to Old Testament principles not to perpetuate cultural norms, but to reaffirm God's timeless truths. These truths are not bound by culture or time, but are applicable to all believers in every age. It is important, then, to view these instructions not as limiting or demeaning to women, but as part of a larger divine order that promotes harmony and effectiveness in fulfilling God's purposes. Women hold immense value and are called to significant roles within both the home and the church. Their contributions are not lesser, but different. In many ways, this difference enhances the effectiveness of the church's witness and mission. The unique roles of men and women, as established by Scripture, work together to display the manifold wisdom of God. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10. Thus, understanding and applying 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 13 through 14 requires an appreciation of the biblical narrative and the purposes of God in creation and redemption. As the church today seeks to navigate the complex issues of roles and gender, it must do so with a commitment to the authority of Scripture, respecting both its prohibitions and its permissions. In doing so, the Church not only adheres to a biblical standard, but also models a divine order that is meant to reflect the character of God and advance the gospel in a world that is often marked by confusion and strife. In conclusion, these verses from 1 Timothy call the Church to a higher standard, one that respects and adheres to the order and roles established by God from the beginning. This adherence is not for the sake of tradition alone, but for the sake of truth, which, when rightly understood and applied, leads to freedom, flourishing, and the fulfillment of God's redemptive purposes in the world.